Talking God with Uncle Luke. I want to live forever. I assume everybody else does too. Come on in, let's check it out. Luke chapter 20, verse 27 to 44. All the bubbas of the world, we got one mission in mind. Welcome to the Biblical Channel. Always glad somebody's showing up. We try to keep it real simple here at the Biblical Channel. We are absolutely convinced that human beings that God created need good stories. And the Bible is nothing but good stories. It's all good stories. It's only the funsuckers that have come along and tried to make it seem like the Bible is not what it actually is. And that's a bunch of fun stories that help us to shape our lives and give meaning to our lives and give us real answers to the real problems that we really do have. The Bible's the only one that can have fun with us and be serious with us at the same time. And we can take it seriously and have fun at the same time too. So read your Bible, say your prayers, get together, talk God. That's what we're all about. We live in a world full of bullshit. So we're trying to get away from the bullshit and onto the holy shit so that we can start shooting the shit with others and get it right, man. So that we can, say things like the Lord's Prayer, Father, hallowed be your name, your kingdom come, give us our daily bread, forgive us as we forgive, lead us not into temptation. So we can say that with confidence and gusto so that it motivates us and it kind of straightens us out and we're like, yeah, buddy, that's the point. Hey, we're just a bunch of hillbillies here. We're just a bunch of bubbas, and to all the bubbas of the world. Let's dive into the next section that Uncle Luke is taking us to in this grand story that Uncle Luke is telling us. As always, all of the apostles, all of the prophets should be seen as our kin because God has brought us into the family. And so these are the trustworthy people. These are the fun people that we sit down and listen to for good stories that shape our lives, just like we would family. So Uncle Luke, man, Uncle Peter, Uncle James, Uncle, Matthew, you name it. I don't think these guys got it wrong. I really don't. That's just where I come from. So if they got it right, then that means Jesus is who he says he is. And hey, man, at the end of the day, I'm a Christian because I want to live forever. I don't make any bones about that. I don't see anything serious in this world. I don't see any conversation that is addressing my problem with death seriously. So anywho, I think Jesus does. I think God does. I think the Bible does. I think the apostles do, the prophets do, and they are not going to lead us astray. And Jesus is going to set the record straight here, as he always does. So we got this fun passage, Luke chapter 20, verse 27 to 46. So it goes like this. This is how the story goes. There are some who come to Jesus, the Sadducees. We'll talk about them in a minute. Those who deny the resurrection, as Uncle Luke tells us, and they ask them a question. Oh, teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies having a wife but no children, that the man must take the widow and raise up offspring for his brother. Now, there were 7 brothers. The first took a wife, died without children. The second and the third took her likewise. And all 7 of them ended up marrying this bride and died and left her no children. So Jesus, our big question is this: after this woman dies, in the resurrection, therefore, whose wife will this woman be? For the 7 had her as wives. Jesus? Jesus. I imagine him shaking his head saying, good Lord, you people know how to make a mess of the Bible, which we do. Anywho, Jesus says this. He says, hey, okay, here's your answer. Knuckleheads. Here's the answer. The sons of this age marry and are given in marriage, but those who are considered worthy to attain that age and to the resurrection from the dead, neither marry nor are given in marriage, for they cannot die anymore because they are equal to the angels and they are sons of God, being sons of the resurrection. But that the dead are raised, even Moses showed in the passage about the bush where he calls the Lord the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Now, he is not God of the dead, but the living, and all live to him. Some of the scribes answered, Teacher, you have answered well. For they no longer dared to ask him a question. Then Jesus doesn't let him off the hook. He goes, oh, whoa, 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 got something else for you. He said to them, hey, how can they say that the Christ is David's son? For David himself says in the book of Psalms, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. David thus called him Lord. So how is he his son? Okay, let's take this from the top. It's a lot of fun. Jesus is always having fun with the audience, especially those who consider themselves to be pompous, pedantic pricks. Well, at least we consider them to be pompous, pedantic pricks. And I think Jesus does too, but we know the type. And Jesus is being accosted by many different groups of people who are putting him down or, assembling the clever trap. And this is another one of those clever traps. We've seen a lot of clever traps, and Jesus has set us his own clever trap. So this has been this long continuing dialogue in the temple scene where Jesus has come into this temple scene with fanfare. Popular people, the populace are actually pumped up in there. They are fist pumping old Jesus because they have their expectations that he is the Christ. And as the Christ, they expect him to do what David has always done, and that is, sack the enemy. The enemy here is Rome. And so the people are behind Jesus for probably not the right reasons, but that's okay. Jesus is all right with that. He understands there's a half-truth to it, and he'll address that by the time we get to this passage. So first of all, let's go back to the top of our passage, and let's sort it out. First of all, it's the Sadducees. The Sadducees are the political establishment. When it comes to the different groups, there are those who are sad, you see, and those who are fair, you see. If you want to remember that, the basic group of religious leaders fall into two groups: the political, which are the Sadducees, and then the Pharisees are more, believe it or not, they're more of the working class, religious leaders. It's not that they don't have problems. They got a lot of problems too, but they are closer and in touch with the working class, more so than the Sadducees. The Sadducees are more in touch with the temple. And if you're in touch with the temple, you're in touch with Herod. Herod is the political leader that Rome has appointed. And so the Sadducees, as well as the Sanhedrin, these are the political people. Now, they're not very well liked. As most politicians go, they never find, people really loving them or trusting them, but they take their run at Jesus because they also understand the tension that is around Jesus, that he is a political leader that is going to potentially raise up an army to sack Rome. And so they are there to try to foil his efforts, just like everybody else has been there to try to foil Jesus' efforts. All of the doubting Thomases of the world come forward in these passages. Anyhow, these Sadducees, because they are sad, you see, they don't believe in the resurrection. That's what Uncle Luke tells us. Uncle Luke tells us the most important thing you got to remember about the Sadducees for our story coming up here is that they deny the resurrection. So what does it mean that they deny the resurrection? Well, what that means is that they are opposing, for whatever reasons, and I'm not sure that we're all that clear. We just know that Uncle Luke says this group went around saying there is no resurrection, okay? And they presented themselves as Bible teachers. And as we know, you can teach the Bible wrong, and Jesus is going to address this issue in time. But they come to Jesus thinking of themselves as extremely clever. And they think the scenario that they're going to present to Jesus is going to, destroy the argument for the resurrection by making a game of it, by making it a big joke. And so they present this whole thing about a man. It's the Levirate marriage that is coming under view. And in the first 5 books of the Bible, when God does set up Israel as a community of God's people, God is very, very concerned about the widows. God is always concerned about the widows and those who are treated by society the worst. The widows are the most vulnerable people in society then, and still probably are today in many ways, because, I don't know. Maybe are much better to the widows today. That's fine, and that's good if we are. But I still think widows are vulnerable, and I still take Jesus' command, God's command from the book of Genesis to Revelation, to be concerned about the widows very seriously, and to especially look for the underdogs, and to look out for the underdogs. So this has been one of God's big concerns, is the widow, and so in the development of Israel, God established that a widow would not lose her place in society by protecting her through the marriage of a younger brother or another brother in the family, so that she did not lose her inheritance. That's what it's all about, okay? So what the Sadducees are doing here is they are, making fun of something that is very serious to God, and that is taking care of the widows. That's what it was. But they're making fun of it because they don't, for whatever reason, they don't believe in the resurrection. And they're saying, this kind of proves that the resurrection is kind of a silly idea, because, in the end, in the resurrection, if she has married these 7 people, then she has to be the wife to 7 men. That doesn't make any sense, right? And honestly, I think that Jesus has to be shaking his head and saying, it is amazing how poorly God's word can be handled. And I think as human beings, we've got to recognize that the Bible can be handled poorly. Jesus, God, the Bible, addresses this reality in nth degrees, that the Bible can be handled poorly. If God takes a risk, it's just that he gets his word out there. He makes a story out of history. He presents himself through the pages of the Bible that we read, but we also read in the pages of the Bible how grossly misrepresented God's words are. And that's what's going on here. So the topic of the resurrection is also the topic of the judgment and the final judgment. And this is probably why the Sadducees deny the resurrection, because the topic of the resurrection also brings up the topic of the final judgment of God. And so the Sadducees, being the political arm, of the Jews that's attached and close to Rome, kind of wants to muffle out any kind of talk of the final judgment of God, because that's what gets everybody riled up and wanting them to sack Rome, especially with a Christ in their leadership, So the Sadducees are most likely denying for that reason, but we don't exactly know. Jesus is going to hit this tension right on. Jesus has also said to his private audiences, hey, listen, I am going to die. I'm going to Jerusalem, and I'm going to die. And not only am I going to die, but I am going to raise. So, these guys trying to hit up Jesus with a denial of the resurrection is actually denying part of the fundamental of Jesus and his mission, and that is to die and rise. And Jesus is going to make a mockery of them, because it is the heart and soul of Jesus' own storyline that he is playing out. He is aware and is convinced he is going to die and rise again to fulfill the promises that God has made in the past. Because, again, spoiler alert, Jesus does see himself as God. Okay, well, these Sadducees and their clever scheme, so to speak, are really quite typical that we even see today in today's funsuckers. The Sadducees are amazingly the same kind of people that are, running around today. We are not as clever as we think. We run around with our clever little arguments, but we are still the same breed of funsuckers that have always existed. There's nothing new under the sun. And so these funsuckers have this idea that the house of cards is a genuine philosophy that tears down other philosophies. And what I mean by that is, on a more scholarly level, the deconstructionists, led by Jacques Derrida, that French booger. Jacques Derrida, go ahead, Wikipedia him, or, read up on him. If you've gone to college, you probably have heard of him. If you've not gone to college, you probably haven't heard of him. Not a big deal if you haven't heard of Jacques Derrida, because I think he's a jagoff anyhow. But But deconstructionism is exactly the mode of the Sadducees. It's the idea that if that everything, a philosophy or whatever is made, even history is made of a house of cards, and if you pull one card out from the bottom, the whole house of cards falls. If you've ever played, house of cards on a rainy day, stacking cards up as high as you can, it's a pretty vulnerable thing. If you take one away from the bottom, the whole doggone thing comes down, kind of like a big Jenga game, etc. But that is the way deconstructionism works, is you're just looking for one little piece that you pull out and you're convinced that you brought the whole house down. That is like the logic of a 4-year-old. I'm sorry, but it hasn't changed. It never will change. It's always going to be the same. And I do believe we live in a society right now of deconstructionism that, is quite convinced that the only thing you have to do to make yourself a genius in society is to be able to tear something down with one little, quip or one little stupid phrase or cliche or whatever. You don't have to have the whole, you don't have to, listen to somebody in the entirety of their argument. You just have to find the one thing you don't like. That's who we are as people. The Sadducees are exactly the way our society is today, which I find amazing. Part of the reason why I love the Bible is because it is so salient to our existence. God knows us better than we know ourselves. But anyhow, don't expect Jesus to go along with this because it is the heart and soul of his strategy of what he is about to do. And the completion of God's story is Jesus' death and resurrection and how it finds meaning for us. So Jesus addresses them and he says, you guys are nuts. Well, he doesn't say that, but he says, listen, the sons of this age marry and are given in marriage. So the way that Jesus sees history is that there are, different ages, and Jesus divides history into 2 different ages. There is the age of marrying and giving in marriage, and then there is the age to the resurrection from the dead. We have not reached the age of the resurrection from the dead yet. We are still in the age of marrying and giving in marriage. And really what Jesus is taking us back to, once again, is Genesis chapter 1, when God's great plan for the earth that he has made and the beautiful creation that he has made is to put mankind at the top of this creation, to be under him, but yet in charge of all of creation, over the fish, over the animals, over the plants, over everything, under God's management. That's God's plan. But God's plan is that the man and the woman are going to come together and multiply, that, the husband and the wife will become moms and dads. That's the essential of God's, big plan. It's a good plan. It's a plan that, it's very rational, it's very natural. The husband and the wife become moms and dads, the 2 become one, the 2 become one. Well, anyhow, I don't need to explain that to you, but my sons found it hilarious when they were about 6 years old, and I explained it to them, through this. They just, anyhow, mom, the husband and wife come together to become one, and lo and behold, they become moms and dad. And then the children are going to leave the mom and the dad and make their own, new family unit. Again, the family has been God's idea to populate the earth, to fill the earth, to bless, to bring God's blessing into the world onto human beings, requires a substantial number of human beings. And Jesus says, this age that we are in right now is the age of marrying and giving in marriage, because God is going to get his way. God is going to fill the earth with people. He just is. You may think you're thwarting God. You may think that you can declare that God is dead. You can declare whatever you want, but God is going to get his way. If there is a God, God is going to be right. And, so Jesus is saying, number one, you don't understand the nature of the age that we're living in. The age that we're living in is still God getting the earth populated, raising up more human beings through the simple act of procreation, husbands and wives that come together to become one, and then Well, become moms and dads, have children, who then go out and do the same thing over and over and over. And the whole idea is that God is bringing his blessing to human beings this way. But Jesus says, but there is something else out there, and that is the next age. And the next age is characterized by the age of the resurrection. And Jesus says, honestly, when that happens, there will be no more need for mums and dads, husbands and wives, period. So your question is awfully short-sighted, Jesus says, because in the age of the resurrection, when it's all said and done, when the judgment of God happens, when the dead are raised once and for all, when the faithful are raised, when all human beings are raised once and for all, together and forevermore, then there's no more need for procreation. There's no more need to have more sons and daughters. So in some weird way, the Jehovah Witnesses are kind of right. There is some sort of set number of human beings that are eventually going to populate the planet, but we don't know what that number is. No way. But that's what's going on. And that's Jesus' simple answer. And it also reminds me of the Mormon boys that came to my door and they presented to me, they're like, hey, in selling Mormonism, they said, hey, we believe that the family sticks together. And I think that, Jesus might sit them down with the same exact conversation, say, you've got problems on your hand here. You're not thinking about, the whole thing correctly. I think they mean well. I don't think that they mean harm by it, but they were kind of presenting it like a car salesman would present options on different models, and I just got a big chuckle out of that they were like, hey, we believe that the family stays together. Well, I believe we're all going to stay together, but we're going to be one big family of God. We're going to be one big family. We're all brothers and sisters in the age to come, in the resurrection. We're not going to go on about this business of mums and dads having sex anymore. I know, maybe that comes as a shock to you. And you know what? The Bible, it doesn't get, extremely detailed about this, but when Jesus pushes up against the wall, he says, here's the reality. So it is the reality. In the age to come, when it's all said and done, in the resurrection, as Jesus and the Old Testament explains, that when the resurrection comes, that is the final judgment of God, and everybody is who they are at that point. And there's no more need to expand or multiply. So that's the logic. And he says also, here's the good news. When that day comes, the reason why you don't need to have moms and dads and husbands and wives anymore is because everybody's equal to the angels. In fact, the Bible says that we're over the angels, and which is good news, that we're all sons of God. And ladies, don't worry, because we're all the bride of Christ. So, this whole male-female argument that we're having, even today is a bit interesting, funny, weird. I don't know, all of it. Listen, man, I'm not here to put anybody down, but I'm just saying what Jesus is saying, and that is the distinction of male and female is something that really is for this age. It's not for the age to come. And so if the distinction of male and female is not there, well, then, we're not going to be having sex. But I do believe there'll be something better. I don't know. I hate to say too much here, but he also calls us sons of the resurrection. So that's Jesus' answer. And then Jesus says, oh, and by the way, I think the Sadducees were also of the mind to say that we only read the first 5 books. That's the only books we believe in. I think Josephus says that, as well. But either way, Jesus seems to be addressing something else. He says, oh, by the way, God is not the God of the dead. Do you remember that? And I love the way Jesus says this. He says, you remember that passage about the bush? The passage about the bush. It's just a funny way of saying it. The passage about the bush, and that passage about the bush that he's talking about is Exodus, chapter 3. Go back, read it. But it's when Moses, sees a bush on fire and God speaks to him and God addresses himself and Moses addresses God now as the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, God of Jacob. Those guys are dead for a long time. Well, if God is the God of Abraham, God of Isaac, and God of Jacob, he must be the God of the living, not the dead. And let's just stop in our tracks and say this. I want to live forever, baby. I don't want to die. I've never met anybody that really, really wants to die. You may give up on this life, that I've seen. But everybody at some point sees their life as wishing it could go on positively on forever. I want to live forever. And I get this sense that I want to live forever. Even though I'm going to die, I still want to live forever. And even the non-Christian world, with the Gilgamesh project going on and AI going on, there is a huge push to try to figure out how it is that we can live forever. So humanity has not changed its desire to live forever. People want to live forever. And so the idea that we die and there's nothing else is the saddest, most depressing idea that humans come up with. And those who try to turn it around is that this is the best way forward. I'm sorry, but you're a knucklehead. You're not speaking to the way that people think. You're a small part of the population, and I think that's a mental disorder. I think the average ordinary human being, the average hillbilly out there, the average Bubba of the world, wants to live forever. And that's what Jesus is saying. You guys are absolutely barking up the wrong tree here. The whole point of God, no matter how you define God, the whole point of God is some sort of hope that there's something more to this life than what we actually have. And somehow, some way, after we die, life might go on. The Bible and Jesus Christ are really the only sources that I find that really talk about this seriously. Maybe you don't take it seriously, but I do, and I'm all in on what Jesus is saying. So Jesus says, listen, he's not the God of the dead. He's the God of the living, and all live to him. The scribes even say, well, that put us in checkmate, but Jesus says, I'm not letting you off the hook. I've got something else to say. I want you to go back and read the Psalms, that bit where David himself, says that the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand. And what Jesus is referring to here is that everybody has recognized that he is a son of David. But what the populist is, thinking about Jesus and his son of David status is that, that David, slew the Canaanites once and for all, the Philistines who were the Canaanites once and for all, and that the Christ is going to come and slay the enemies of God. That may be true in the final end because, yes, indeed, God's Messiah in the very end of things is the judgment of God and the judge. And Jesus is trying to bring up this point when he says this about this verse in the Psalms. He says, listen, David is chump change. Even David saw himself as chump change. So you guys thinking that the Christ is going to raise up an army like David raised up an army are thinking too small. What you need to be thinking about is that the Christ is going to demonstrate the resurrection. And if the Christ can demonstrate the resurrection, then the biblical idea of the resurrection meaning that there is a judge and a judgment of God coming for planet Earth that isn't now, but it's coming at some point in time, well, then it can all be taken a lot more seriously if Jesus demonstrates, if the Christ demonstrates the reality of the resurrection, then he's boss. He's boss over everything because he knows how to live forever. You see where I'm going with this? You see where Jesus is going with this? Jesus is saying you need to think of David as chump change. Yes, I am a son of David, as God promised that a son of David would bring the fulfillment of God to fruition. That he is a son of David, yes, but David is chump change compared to who he is. And even David said that he was chump change compared to who the Christ in his line, compared to the son that he looked forward to. And Moses talked about this too. Moses said, there's a prophet coming like me that's even better than me. And what does that mean? It means that the one who God has promised to come, the one that Moses looked forward to, the one that David looked forward to, is not just Lord over Israel, but a Lord of the earth. And not just Lord of the earth, but Lord of life and death. Lord of life and death. So when Jesus dies and rises again, he proves that he is the Lord of life and death. And therefore, if you want to live forever, this is the guy you got to get behind. And for all of those fatalists and nihilists today, I say you are sad, you see. And sadly, our society is now chock full of fatalists and nihilists. Well, that's where I'm going to end right now. I'm on board with Jesus because I want to live forever, like Billy Joe Shaver sings that song, I want to live forever. Look that one up. It's a good one. Catch you next time.